Good afternoon from London, or good morning wherever you are in the rest of the world. Welcome to BBIA's second webinar of 2018. And this webinar, we will talk about the recycling infrastructure for compostable materials. We have a very qualified panel of speakers. Andy Sweetman, our chairman, and also the marketing manager of Futamura Packaging from Northwest England. Lucy Frankel, who is the communications director of Vegware. Emily Nichols, who is responsible for the organic recycling group at the Renewable Energy Association. And Charlie Truesdell, who is also the chair of the organic recycling group, but in his own right, very well known and experienced professional in the composting industry. And the reason for this webinar at this particular juncture is that as we see more and more brands adopting compostable materials, people are asking the question more commonly, well, how do we ensure that these materials go back to recycling and are organically recycled through the composting system? You may have read that the Co-op Food Group on Saturday announced that their stores will be rolling out compostable carrier bags for dual use as bin liners for food waste collections. You will have read that Waitrose from next spring will be using all compostable materials for their fruit and vegetable bags. You will have read that the UK Houses of Parliament has decided to adopt compostable tableware within its various canteens and restaurants and cafes within Parliament itself. A really strong signal if the Houses of Parliament adopt compostable materials about how they think they are sustainable and how they have worked out the recycling routes. And on that, we will hear more from Lucy Frankel shortly. Our first guest speaker this afternoon is Andy Sweetman. And Andy, I give the floor to you for 10 minutes. And Andy is going to talk from the perspective of a UK manufacturer of compostable packaging and how they handle the question about routes back to recycling. Over to you, Andy, and thank you.
Thank you, David. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody, you're now able to see my screen and hear me clearly enough. I'm going to kick off the presentations in this session with, first of all, a little bit of a view of how it feels right now to be a manufacturer of compostable packaging solutions, and then head into some of the challenges that we face as an introduction really to the later speakers. So from our perspective then, as a UK-based manufacturer of compostable packaging solutions, I have to say it's a very, very exciting time to be involved in this particular space. We've been developing for many years now, we've been commercial for many years, but there is absolutely no doubt that particularly in the UK market, following on from the effects of David Attenborough's Blue Planet 2 back end of last year, there's a hugely increased level of interest in this whole debate. So certainly consumer interest and market interest has never been higher. And I've got to be honest and say it's actually great fun working in this space, but it's very complicated. And I would say that there are two big themes which reoccur pretty much all the time. And first of all, that is how we as a manufacturer prove our green credentials. And then outside of what we do ourselves, but directly, what kind of infrastructure is there to make sure that compostable packaging materials can end up getting composted. Now, my background is the best part of 30 years or so selling packaging films, flexible packaging. And in that time, I've sold conventional plastic films, and I've sold our own product, NatureFlex, which is a renewable and compostable material. And I think the slide here illustrates the kind of difference. If we're just selling conventional plastics, people ask us technically what does it do, and then how much does it cost? And then the conversation is largely finished. But when it comes to selling biomaterials, it's a different thing. We get those same two questions, but then we have questions about how you measure renewability. And if you say you're using a crop, well, is that crop sustainable? And then we've got the complexity of the language between biodegradable and compostable. There's industrial composting and home composting, and increasingly, particularly following Blue Planet, we have the question of marine biodegradability. And then some people will turn around and say, oh, but if your material is biodegradable, that means you're encouraging litter, and so on. And of course, it's absolutely right that people would say, well, you're making a green claim here. How do I know that your claim is absolutely valid? Now, the honest answer from a manufacturer's point of view is that every material which is coming out onto the market is different. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of our own particular product, but what I would say is what is common to us as manufacturers is that we're so used to operating in this space, we're used to receiving these questions, that actually you can be pretty sure that we've all tested to independent third-party verifications wherever they're available. And I think I can speak pretty much for the whole of the compostable packaging industry. We don't go out there and make claims that we can't independently validate. And you'll see, for example, the key thing for industrial composting, everyone who will speak today, I'm sure, will be endorsing BSEN 13432 as being the key standard for biodegradability and so on. A couple of final points. I mean, are we encouraging litter? No, absolutely not. I think what you're going to hear about from everybody today is what we are doing is bringing a viable method to actually recycle as much as possible of the organic waste that we produce in this country. So moving on then to what we're talking about today, our industry's vision, and I want in particular to open up by looking at the one big reason for moving towards these materials. Start to conquer probably the two biggest myths that are out there in the marketplace with regards to compostable packaging. But then at the same time, there's no point in shying away from it. There are challenges, and I'll outline three very, very valid challenges that I think that Charlie, Lucy, and Emily will be doing their best to show us how we're going to address that, as well as myself. So firstly then, what's our vision? Well, our vision is that compostable packaging materials are here to complement all the other readily recyclable materials. And that's a very important point. Voluntarily, we don't want to see these new compostable materials ending up in situations where they actually hinder recycling systems. We actually want to be in the areas where there's a problem. Where the other materials are not as effective, and food waste contaminated packaging would be the perfect example of that. What's the big reason why organic waste is such a big issue? And I make the point there about it being an opportunity. Well, depending on whose figures you want to look at, and there's a selection of different UK-wide statistics there, but I think what comes on time and time again is that organic waste, by which I mean like kitchen waste and compostable garden waste and so on, is always something between 30 and 40% of the size of the waste fraction. So for all there's understandably a lot of focus on packaging, the reality is that the single biggest fraction actually is food and garden waste. And so we're looking here at trying to solve not just the smaller picture of packaging waste, but the bigger picture of waste in general. What are the two classic myths that we hear with regards to compostable packaging? Well, first of all, we hear one that says there's no infrastructure for composting in the UK. And that's categorically wrong. And the other speakers will go into more details of this. But already there's over 50 potentially suitable organic recycling facilities here that if we get the logistics right, we'll be easily able to manage compostable packaging as well as the other waste that they deal with. And the other big one is, well, we shouldn't use compostables because they get in the way of plastics recycling. Well, this is categorically wrong. I mean, the first thing we have to say is that even after 70 odd years of putting plastics on the market, we're still in a situation in the UK where only something like 16% of plastics are recycled in the UK. We've got a long, long way to go. But it is important that we avoid any areas where plastics recycling is effective. And I think the compostable industry itself would say that we don't see the value in bringing, for example, compostable bottles onto the market when PET bottle to PET recycling is actually a good system in place already. What we're looking to do is operate in areas where conventional recycling is impractical. And the perfect examples of that will be areas where you have a high level of food contamination in the waste, where you have, for example, catering applications, events, stadium and so on, and also a whole range of areas where you have mixed flexible packaging solutions where you deliberately use a range of different materials laminated together in order to create the right technical requirements for the packaging, but as a result, actual physical recycling becomes completely impractical. So what are the three valid challenges then that compostable packaging has got to address? Well, first of all, it is true that there's an issue around recognition of these materials. You know, as a manufacturer, we set out to make our materials look transparent, to show off the food inside. And as a result, they end up sometimes looking a bit like plastic. So we have to make sure that it's possible for consumers and waste management processors to easily spot our materials. We've also got to ensure that industrial compostable packaging isn't just available to do the packaging, but it's also going to reach the composting facilities in an effective way. And I think it is also fair to say that the plastics and packaging industry are quite confused by what they see with regards to compostable materials. And so anything we can do to help educate the market is critical as well. And how we're doing that within the BBIA is to set out the key definitions. So we're going to agree the universal definition, the way we should be referring to these materials more effectively as compostable rather than biodegradable, and compostable being the key word because there are set standards and criteria that all materials must conform to if they're going to make that claim. Moving on to stage 3, it's important that we agree a single product labeling system for the UK market, and that all of the packaging which goes into this particular market that's making that claim is using the same logo system to make that possible. And that's important from a consumer point of view, but it's also important for the waste management industry to make sure that they can identify these materials effectively. And then, of course, it's not just for us to say what we need to do. We need to make sure we bring on the other key stakeholders in this work. And that's why the BBIA is reaching out to the MRFs, the PERFs, the packaging industry in general, BPF, FPA, and so on, DEFRA, to make sure that everybody's aware about what we're doing here. And this really is the most important part. As I said earlier on, we're not looking to get in the way of conventional packaging recycling. We're looking to be complementary to deal with the hard to deal with areas. And our vision, if you like, is that all households and businesses in the UK will have 2 recycling bins, and one of those will take conventional packaging materials and the other will take all bio-waste type solutions off towards composting. And our way of accelerating that vision will be to create a powerful movement and a united movement. This is not the BBIA, the composting industry versus the plastics industry versus the paper industry. This is all of the industries getting together and actually making a difference, bringing viable and practical solutions to solve our packaging waste recovery system. And if we get it right, this is what it should look like. So we have compostable packaging on the aisles in supermarkets that will protect the food products during the distribution chain and at the customer's house until those packets are then opened up, collect that compostable waste together with food waste and garden waste, bring it all the way through the chain through to industrial composting, which then produces organic carbon and nutrients to be locked back into soil to create the perfect circle of life, if you like. So that's our vision and our basic plan, and I'll now hand over to the other speakers to go into some more detail.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And for all of those who are registered and are listening to us, and there are over 50 of you at the moment, I forgot to mention before that you can send in through the chat or through the questions and answer system, which are at the bottom of your screen, messages, and towards the end of the session, after the speakers have gone through their presentations, I will collect them together into the most pertinent questions to ask to our speakers. And yes, you will get a copy of the presentations after the sessions, and this webinar will be posted on the BBI website in a few days' time so that you can share it and share the presentations with your colleagues. Now, Lucy Frankel is online. It gives me great pleasure to introduce her. And she, of course, is smiling because she has news that the Houses of Parliament are adopting vegware in their systems, in their catering systems. And Lucy is going to talk to us about the vegware model.
Thank you very much, David. So I shall share my screen. Yes, it's very exciting news that we was announced on Thursday that the House of Lords and the House of Commons have decided that they want to move ahead using compostables. They found that to be the most practical solution as part of a whole raft of measures that they're implementing. And for me, this is a very exciting time for our industry, as Andy said, because really we're seeing accolades like Parliament choosing our solution. It shows that what we are talking about really is practical, really it can be a reality here in the UK. So I'd like to give us an overview of what is going on in terms of UK composting compostables. So first up, I'd like to give an overview of the methods that can treat compostable packaging. We know that there are in-vessel composting facilities. These are the best possible destination for compostable packaging. They are designed to take in a variety of inputs, and they are suited to compostable packaging. Emily and Charlie are really the experts to talk about these, but we have been building links with the waste sector for the last 6 years, and already over a third of the UK's in-vessel composting facilities do accept and process used vegware products. The AD sector, wet AD, so many AD plants in the UK are not suited to anything other than pure food waste, but there are some AD plants that do have a solution. Really, it's behind rethinking what to do with what comes off the depackager. AD plants take in a lot of packaged food waste, out-of-date food from supermarkets and so on. And so at the beginning of that process, all packaging is very often stripped off. And then they've got this mixture, a big mush of all sorts of different materials. But really, they are now looking at getting value from that depackager runoff to see, can that go through a composting phase? And this is an exciting opportunity for working closer together with the AD sector. Open Windrow, since July, it has been possible for Open Windrow garden waste composting facilities to consider taking in certified compostable drinks waste, only if it has not been used for anything other than milk or cream residues. And so this is very exciting. It allows us to interact with hundreds of new
Lucy, I'm interrupting you because I can't see your slides. Are you showing slides?
I am showing slides, yes.
We're not seeing them.
Can you see them now? Can you just see me?
I can just see you, but not your slides.
How about now? How's that?
There you go. There you go.
Whew, okay, great. So I chatted through that. I have got to here. So I was talking about garden waste facilities. There are trials underway. This does not mean that compostable packaging can go in any garden waste bin anywhere in the UK. It means that we are able to now start engaging with facilities if they want to investigate this. There are already facilities looking into this, so we hope to have good news for particular regions soon. And lastly, there are on-site composting machines. For example, the Rocket by Tidy Planet. This can be a nice solution if a particular business has a lot of space, if they have people working in their estates and their gardens, if they have a need for compost, and they are able to invest in this a composting machine. It can be a nice solution. So it's worth Googling Dundee and Angus College, because they are a horticultural course. They use the resulting compost in their courses. Really, the key to all of this is working together hand in hand with the waste sector, and we have found it incredibly useful to work together with the Organics Recycling Group, part of REA, which Emily and Charlie are from. This kind of collaboration makes it all possible, because we know that it is not as simple as just phoning up a receptionist at a composting facility. You have to forge these links, you have to set up trials, you have to make sure that any sort of practical barriers can be overcome. So you can see some photographs from a recent trial. that REA.org have been monitoring for vegware products in an IVC. On the left, it has been in there for 3 weeks at 72 degrees, and most of the products have successfully already broken down. There's just a few bits that's still visible. And on the left, you can see the products, and then on the right, you can see that plastic contamination is a major issue. So it's completely valid for recyclers, the plastics recycling industry, to worry about contamination from their point of view. Equally, contamination of plastic going into compost is also a major issue that has to be overcome. So on to my next slide. It's really important that the products go to the right place, and we have done quite a lot of thinking around this. Andy already mentioned labelling and signage, and how it should be really easy for the consumer to find the right bin, and for that bin to be going to the right place. That's the reason why we have been updating all of the branding on our products. We've got this design called the Green Leaf Band, and we're using this to match up. It's on the products, and we put it on our bin signage. We make posters for awareness, and so this is something that we do as part of an engagement package to make sure, really at the end of the day, the most important relationships that we have are with the facility who will be processing our products. And so we do work upstream, we do work with engagement at the client's site, and making sure that everybody understands the product. But the real reason for that is to eliminate contamination as far as possible, so that we can maintain these good relationships with the composting facilities. So I mentioned that we have been working hard on trade collections. We have had Ailey Brunton, who you may already know. She's been with us since 2012, focusing on how vegware products can be broken down in industrial composting, setting up those relationships. So back in 2012, Aberdeenshire, we love Keenans, we still do. Since then, we have been putting in a lot of work, and I'd like to share with you in the next slide where we can currently cover. The infrastructure is in place, as we've discussed. Collections, the routes to those facilities that are able to process the materials, the collections are the part of the jigsaw puzzle that we are putting into place. So what we cannot do right now is say to a national company, yes, we can provide a composting collection in every single part of the UK. Not yet. What we can do right now is we can offer milk round collections, regular collections in many regions. For regions where there is not a collection in place, often there is some other solution with maybe a skip or bulking, or working with the waste sector to work out the details. But at the moment, the regular collections are in these regions. Close the Loop is Vegware's own service. We started this off a year ago, and it covers many areas of Scotland, and that has been running really well. It's been really a positive experience for us. We've now decided to extend that in other areas, so we've just recently also launched it in Bristol, Worcester and Gloucester. As of July, we're now able to talk to garden waste composting facilities. Previous to that, DEFA from the Isle of Man had already given the go-ahead for certified compostable drinks waste to go into a garden waste composting facility there. But since the July news, in other regions of the UK, we are in talks and working out the details with particular garden waste composting facilities. And then we have what we call composting regions. These are routes that we have worked with existing waste collectors to set up. And it's not the whole of the UK, but it's not a bad start. And then we are similarly working behind the scenes, and we are excited about what the next 6 months will bring. we have these relationships in place, and so we're very, very hopeful to have some good news for these other regions, and then more along the line. Often when people talk about composting compostables, there's a lot of question marks around it. People think that it's a theory, that maybe one day it could happen, but I'd like to state that it has been happening for years. This article on the left, which is with our friend Callum from the Bay, he represents, well, he's from a fantastic chippy. If anybody fancies fish and chips and they're in Stonehaven, it's the place to go. But there's small businesses around the UK that have already been using a service like this, who've been composting their products for a number of years. We always find that independent small cafes are the first early adopters, and then it helps prove that that route works, and then the larger corporate sites get on board. And we found that with our Close the Loop experience, that we're now starting to help universities and large corporate offices start to compost their compostables as well. And of course, very excitingly, this news from Thursday that the House of Commons and the House of Lords have decided that this is the most sensible option for them as well. They have a whole raft of measures, including promoting reusables. They will be using compostable disposables, and what's really, I think this is really great, what they are doing is the compostable disposables are going to an in-vessel composting facility, but the pure food waste from back of house is still going to AD, it's still going to anaerobic digestion. And for me, that's great, because we are here to mop up this fraction of the waste that is currently not really going to be reprocessed. So food contaminated disposables currently have very few options because of the low quality of the mix of different materials plus food waste. But what we can see with the Parliament is that it's a really sensible option, and it allows the existing relationships to be stable, be maintained, so the existing waste routes can still send pure food waste to anaerobic digestion. So that is it from me, and I think it's back to David and then possibly Emily.
Thank you, Lucy. That's an excellent presentation. Can I just ask you one question, which is coming from a member of the audience, and that is the concern that some of these compostable materials do not fully break down during the compost process, and therefore are to be found as traces in the compost at the end of them. As somebody who's been in the compost industry for 25 years, I know the answer, but I would like the answer to come from you.
Well, first of all, can you see me, or can you just see my screen still? I'm not quite sure what I'm showing.
We can see you.
You can see me. Okay, fine. I can't see me, but if you can, that's fine. So the composting facilities that process our products, we have a close working relationship with them, and we would be aware if there were issues. I understand that for wood, going through the composting process, larger items would sometimes be put through a second time if it was the case that any of our products had not broken down in the allotted timescale, then that is an option. But we have the deepest set of compostability certification, so that's us investing in third-party certification to prove that our products can break down in the allotted timescales in those circumstances. So really, we feel very confident about our products breaking down, and where any specific facility had any kind of issues, then we're on hand. We've got a team of 3 who deal solely with our relationships with the waste sector, and that we would take that seriously to solve any problems.
Thank you, Lucy. Well, I know Emily and Charlie will go into that a little bit more detail on the composting process. Can I ask all the listeners, all the people who are hearing us today, please to prefer using the question and answer button at the bottom of their page rather than the chat to send in messages. It's easier for us to answer them. Thank you. The next speaker is Nichols. Emily is from the Organic Recycling Group of the Renewable Energy Association, an expert, if ever there was one in the UK, on UK composting capabilities. And Emily is going to go through a recent survey and interviews made with the composting industry on the use of compostable materials. Over to you, Emily.
Hi everyone. I thought I'd start with showing a map of UK biogas facilities, mostly operational ones, some of them projects in design, and it also has some of the operational small-scale composting sites and many of the medium to larger scale ones. These are ones that are producing high-quality compost for use as product in various markets in the UK. Now, at the moment, we don't have a map or a list of facilities that are taking in compostable packaging and non-packaging products, but as you'll have heard from Lucy's talk, they've identified a significant number of in-vessel composting facilities that are processing their material. And we've recently carried out a survey for which we received 22 responses, and 14 of those are accepting compostable packaging and or compostable bin and kitchen caddy liners of one type or another, and would welcome inquiries from more potential suppliers. So we perceive that there's a job for the organics recycling industry to do to make it easier for companies in the compostable packaging and non-packaging product supply chain to identify where potentially that used packaging could go to, either with food waste or with animal-derived drinks waste residue on it. And we could differentiate between facilities that are approved to treat animal byproducts, and I'll say more about that in the slide coming up, and facilities that are not approved to treat animal byproducts, so for example, which are taking the compostable cups and lids that have milk and or cream residues on them, but only those kinds of animal-derived residues. And our listing or mapping could also identify composting facilities that are not yet accepting used compostable packaging and non-packaging products, but who are willing to accept inquiries from potential suppliers and test out how the items go in terms of biodegradation if there are sample quantities supplied for degradation trials. I've put down some key criteria for composting compostables from an organics recycling industry perspective. So they need to meet a relevant standard that's accepted by our regulators. Andy's mentioned the standard EN 13432. There's a similar one that's EN 14995, specifically for plastic products, or plastic-like, I'll describe them as. They're certainly compostable because they have the same degradation and biodegradation criteria as in EN 13432. And there's an American equivalent, the AFTM D6400. And not only compliance with the standard is important, but independent assessment of the evidence of compliance and certification. And there are certification bodies in Europe, and we have a subsidiary that provides the certification service, and we do believe that that independent check on compliance with the standard is critical to this market working efficiently and being trusted going into the future. The second criteria is that the composting facility's permit or registered permit exemption must include an appropriate waste code and description for the compostable packaging or bin liner type product. The regulators are very hot on facilities having correct details in their permit. Thirdly, where compostable items have been in contact with animal-derived food or drink, or have come from a kitchen where such food or drink is handled, the composting facility must be approved for treating animal byproducts. There is an exception that Lucy has mentioned that was allowed in July, which is very specifically for named type of compostable packaging and non-packaging products such as stirrer sticks, where milk and or cream are the only animal-derived residues on the used item. And if you click on the link when the slides are available to you, there's our article there which provides all the detail of that exemption, and it means that potentially a lot more windrow composting facilities for garden waste only could start taking these kinds of used compostable packaging and non-packaging products where all their other expectations can also be met. Composting facilities treating animal-derived food waste, with those ones, some of them are approved only for accepting catering waste, and that's animal-derived food or drink waste from households and premises with a kitchen. So, for example, cafes and restaurants where animal-derived material is prepared in the kitchen. In terms of the retail side of things, thinking of unsold food and drinks waste, food and drinks material, those would be classified as former foodstuffs. And former foodstuffs, as we can see in the bullet point below, are a type of category 3 animal byproduct. There's currently 31 composting facilities in the UK that can take former foodstuffs, and there's 21 that are only allowed to take catering waste in terms of animal-derived waste, apart from Europe. And I've included a link to that list. So if any of you want to visit and look at it, you can identify sites and some geographic information is provided. And in Northern Ireland, there are three further composting sites, but they are only permitted for catering waste. So from household sources, food or drink derived waste with compostable packaging would be okay, or premises that have a kitchen, but not unsold food from retail store shelving. Further criteria for composting compostables, that there always needs to be a manageable proportion of them in the input. So we need to consider the winter period, where typically total inputs to composting facilities from garden waste and food waste to a lesser extent are lower than in late spring, summer and early autumn. And the operators need the compostable packaging material to be in a manageable proportion so that there's enough moisture and nutrients in the mixture for the microbes to biodegrade the compostable material well enough. And adequate composting process timescale is one that composters have responded to in our recent survey, and that raises the question, what's adequate? You may have seen BBC News recently where the reference is a 12-week composting process, and we would say that there can be some flexibility on that. I've got some slides coming up where we've got examples that composters are given of timescales that they're using when composting compostable packaging. But things that will influence the timescale that's effective are how the process is managed, the characteristics of the compostable packaging, its thickness usually is a key influence, the proportion of compostables in the mixture, the particle size range of compost that the producers are trying to make. So the finer they try to make it, the fewer the likely residues of compostable material. But having said that, if you go for a finer compost range, then you get a lower yield of compost. So generally, composters try to make fine, medium, and coarser grades of compost, And the residues of compostables tend to be in the coarser grade. And they'll either try to remove those residues with what we call windsecting or air classifier machines, or potentially, if a significant amount ends up in the woody oversized material, some of the facilities will send that back to the beginning of the process so that the woody material has further time to biodegrade, and so too does the compostable packaging residue. Now, they can do that if contaminants such as conventional plastic are low enough, and that is the key problem that composters have, and a concern relating to compostable packaging. How much conventional plastic is going to be in there? So, relating to timescale comments from the survey, visible residues of composting packaging at screening stage, we asked, did they see that visible residues? Yes, these ones responded, yes, they do. So, for example, 6 weeks in vessel composting, 6 weeks to 8 weeks in vessel then aerated static pile processing, 8 weeks in vessel composting. 3 of them were seeing residues after 8 weeks in vessel. One of them finds compostable bags disappear but doesn't see compostable packaging disappear, and that's probably due to the packaging being thicker. 9 weeks IBC, 10 weeks open window composting, 11 weeks open window composting. And then one of our respondents did say they see no visible residue of compostable packaging at composting compost screening stage after 8 weeks of IBC and open window composting. So that's quite a mixed picture. Composters want evidence that compostable items biodegrade, and in terms of product testing, before the material arrives at the composting facility, the EN 13432 standard testing requires disintegration tests and biodegradability tests, and results of those laboratory reports could be shared with composters, and that would give them some indication of how quick the biodegradation might be in a real-time composting process. We also would highlight the importance of trialling compostable items and assessing the results before a composter decides whether to go into a contract with a supplier of waste compostable material, either with or without food, because lab scale testing for the purpose of compliance with compostability standards isn't always exactly the same as real world composting experience. So hence the recommendation. And in terms of reasons why composters are not accepting compostables, some of them responded, no, we don't. Reasons were compostables take too long to biodegrade. It's too difficult to differentiate them from non-compostable contaminants, so for example, conventional plastic. The amount and the presence of contamination, particularly plastic, is costing composters 21 to around £100,000 per annum per facility. And then on top of that, not just the cost of removing, but the cost of dealing with that plastic afterwards. Landfill fees are £115 a tonne, plus the transport cost, or if it's sent to an energy from waste facility, £90 a tonne plus transport cost. So our key message is that contamination costs the organics recycling industry a lot of money, and for more compostables to be composted in the future, the suppliers of the waste will need to do enough to ensure that their contamination by non-compostables is absent, or preferably a very low manageable level. Composters have also said they lack time to identify compostable items to distinguish them from non-compostable ones in waste delivered at composting facilities, and that's particularly delivery into the reception areas. Waste has to be fed into the biological parts of the composting process within set time periods that are set in the permits for composting. And so our view is that certification marking of compostables is valuable at the stage of specifying compostable packaging, buying it, and waste discarding. So householders and staff in business settings, when they're looking at the packaging and deciding which bin should it go in, that's the value of the certification mark and the identification marking that, for example, Lucy was showing on the vegware product. And it also enables more efficient policing of the compostable product market, because working in the area of compostable certification for some years, we have found that there are a significant number of products in the market that claim to be biodegradable or even compostable, where they don't have proof of compliance with the standards nor independent certification. And those kinds of products have cost our composters significant money as past experience. Moving on, there are positive experiences with suppliers of food plus compostable waste from commercial sources, and the vegware initiatives are very good examples of those. And there's also concern about non-compostable plastics from household sources in particular. And part of the concern is because plastic bin liners are cheaper than compostable ones. The other concern is to do with education. So householders not having enough education so far, and the issue that Andy has mentioned, the importance of certification marking, or what he called product labelling. And we certainly do identify that we need to work with the BBIA and our certification subsidiary to increase awareness of the certification mark and help specifiers and buyers to source appropriate compostable products. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Given experience that I have been in some of the other countries around Europe, but also in California, it's clear that the food waste, as Andy said in his presentation, the food waste stream is the largest of the municipal waste streams that we have. And whilst a lot of our participants are asking questions about how we can collect compostable packaging, how we can collect these films, how we can get them back, what are the routes, etc. It needs to be said, and this is not us versus the plastics industry, it needs to be said that the plastics industry in 70 years has done an awful job of actually getting its materials back to recycling. And we're at the beginning of a process in the last couple of years, and we need to do a hell of a job to get our materials back to recycling. But the interesting thing which comes out of your presentation is the amount of plastics which are going to composting plants. And so to those people who are listening, who actually have some control over how they decide to package the material, the products which they put onto the market with their brands, have they thought not just about whether compostables are recyclable or not, but have they thought about the damage which is being done to the food waste industry through plastics which are non-recyclable? And I think your message there about the contamination of plastics in food waste collections is very strong.
Good.
Thank you. Now, if you have plastics in food waste collections, you're inevitably going to get plastics in the end product, which is the compost. And of course, this is what we do not want, because we do not want compost being made and a lot of energy and time and money is spent to make it and to send it out of the composting facility with plastics or microplastics in it. We actually want compost which is clean, and this is the role of compostable materials, is to ensure that food waste is brought to food waste treatment plants as cleanly as possible. Now, Charlie Truesdale, who is, as I said, the chair of the Organic Recycling Group and is an industry expert for some time, is going to talk to us now about the end of the pipeline, about where compost fits in, about how we make it and how we use it. Over to you, Charlie.
Okay. Hopefully the technology will work.
Yes, we've got your screen slide.
It does. Excellent. Good. So I'm going to have a fairly quick run through, play a little bit of catch up, and I want to talk on the practical side. It's great having all the technical bits, but from a composting side, I've been in this business for scarily over 25 years, and I think it's important to go through some of the detail. So we feel from the Organics Recycling Group, it's really crucial to manage organic wastes in a sustainable way, producing a quality compost which will improve soil. In very round terms, we have open air windrow, OAW, so that's a kind of typically a green waste site. IVC, which is in-vessel composting. Dry AD, not particularly common in the UK, although there are some new ones in the pipeline, and the wet anaerobic digestion. So as we've heard from Emily, certified compostable packaging is not a problem. And in my view, and those of the Organics Recycling Group, plastic contamination is. So to go back to what does it actually look like? So this is a typical image of certified compostable packaging and packaged food waste turning up at, in this case, an in-vessel composting site. It looks pretty disgusting. It's a little bit smelly, but in this case, this is almost all the proper certified compostable packaging. Once it's processed and it's gone through a sanitization phase, this is what a large-scale composting site looks like. So we call this the stabilization. So it's not finished, it's, as I say, gone through a sanitization, and this is very much the production stage. This particular site processes in excess of 100,000 tonnes a year. And this, I still, quite sadly, after 25 years, get quite excited about this. From my horticultural roots, I like to call this black gold. This is what compost looks like when it's been properly managed, gone through an appropriate process, and this is certified to the PAS 100 quality protocol. So very safe to use, and you can see it looks pretty good. However, we do have to remember a lot of work has gone into this place, and in a moment you will see the problems around plastic. Let's talk a little bit, before we get to that, about the value of compost. I have to thank Emily for some of the detail here. So currently, in terms of the PAS 100, we're producing 1.83 million tonnes, and that will typically be sold for around £2 a tonne. So it's got a value of a bit over 4.5 million. We have to remember that not everybody wants to go down the PAS 100. It costs quite a lot of money, and some people choose to treat it all as a waste. But that still has a value, a little bit less, but still over £1 million. People forget that compost has a fertilizer replacement value, as well as the organic matter, and that's perhaps the most important part, putting organic matter back into UK soils. And you can see from the figures here, if we add up all of this value, it's a little bit under 16 million, which I think is something to just reflect on, that we all know the UK soils are in generally poor condition. Getting this type of material back to land is something that's pretty crucial, I think. Now, I wish I could hear a gasp of 60 odd people going, oh my God. And this slide, to me, says it all. This says to our industry why we have such a problem with plastic. So we can talk all about the ins and outs of certified compostable packaging. Is it a bit difficult? How do we make sure people use it properly? But right now, UK composting industry has this on a daily basis. So for those of you who aren't fully familiar with composting sites, if you remember that little slide I showed with that lovely black gold compost, to produce that, everything has to go through a screener. And when you screen on these large-scale in-vessel composting sites, you remove the larger fragment of wood, but also you take out all the contamination. And this is what you end up with. So when Emily talked about the cost of disposal on a site being anything from, or cost of removing this, anything between 20 and 100 grand, it's probably a little bit on the low side. So my wish would be, if we can get to a point where society just stops using plastic in its food waste and we're using compostable packaging, we would no longer have this problem. It's a huge cost to the industry, and I hope you will feel that it's properly shocking. So in order to go back to a little bit about what the Organics Recycling Group is trying to do, and there have been various questions about certified composite packaging, how do you use it, where does it work? There is still work to be done, and we would fully support it where appropriate. That is, to make sure it's used in the right system. It doesn't replace, Andy said at the very beginning of the slides, clearly there's no point in having a compostable plastic bottle. That would be ridiculous. Perfectly good recycling systems for plastic bottles. One of the things that Lucy talked about, and whilst Vegware have been very supportive here, I have to say there are lots of other suppliers of certified compostable packaging. It's absolutely critical that we have that closed loop in order to minimize contamination. So whoever's selling the packaging sells to their, whether it's a cafe, a restaurant, whatever it might be, to ensure that they understand they put their certified compostable packaging and food waste in one bin, which will go off to the composting site, and they don't contaminate with other materials. So as I said, I was going to have a fairly quick gallop through because I see there are a number of questions. And I just want to finish with the point that the Organics Recycling Group encourages engagement with packaging and material manufacturers. And we offer support and advice on compostability. And REAL, which is the Renewable Energy Assurance Limited, and that's part of the overall REA, they provide the certification for the UK on compostable packaging. So, David, I said I would do a quick run through, and maybe we could all answer a few questions.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I think it's very encouraging to see composting, images of composting and see how it really works, because I'm sure that many of our listeners are from the packaging industry, from brands, and actually people often don't get the connection between food and packaging. And the composting plant is where the connection happens. And as you say, when that packaging can be composted as well, it eliminates in terms of contamination, costs, etc. We've had many questions come in, some of which I have answered and have been answered online individually to who asked the question. Repeat that all these presentations and the webinar will be available on the website in the next few days. Andy, looking at the bigger picture, you as a global manufacturer, because you're a Japanese company, a global manufacturer of compostable materials, one of the questions has been, well, that's great that you may sort out the problem in the UK, but how am I going to put a brand onto the market the world with the one type of packaging which is everywhere? Of course, one could find the answer. Well, 70% of the world has no collection systems of anything. Well, how are you selling in the rest of the world anyway? So the question is, what do you see in the bigger picture in terms of people being able to use and recover compostable materials elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I think that we have to be realistic and say, I mean, different countries are at different stages of the life cycle. So for every country which is really getting its act together with compostable materials, there are others that have yet to even look at the question. So it's going to take time. It's going to be step by step. I think one of the things that we need to bear in mind as we move to introducing a single harmonized logo in the UK is exactly that. If we can make the logo we use as international as possible, then that's going to help. There's only so much space you have on a pack, and the brands themselves have other things they want to put on just as well as the recycling information. So for us to be as mindful of that as possible, I think is important in doing so. But it can be done. I mean, there's not a million standards out there to work to. So we ought to be able to get ourselves to a good logo system that can identify it. Now, if a country doesn't yet have an infrastructure in place, it's not the end of the world. It's just neutral, if you like. But it's I sometimes make the point that there were no airports when the Wright brothers invented the aeroplane, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't the right invention to bring along. So step by step.
Yes, I would also say that there was no infrastructure for recycling plastics when plastics came along. No infrastructure for recycling electronic and electric materials when they came along. And the industry is still running on catch up with our electronic equipment. Jane Gilbert, a very welcome guest. Jane, hi. Nice to hear from you. Asked how can we accelerate the building of in-vessel composting plants in the UK? A lot of incentives have gone into building wet AD plants, which of course strip out all packaging. And for those who've asked the question, no, this webinar is not about AD, it is about composting, because wet AD plants tend to strip out whatever packaging comes to them, whether it's compostable or not. So Jane's question really for you, Emily, and for you, Charlie, is how do we incentivize building of more in-vessel composting plants in the UK, rather than going down the road of more wet AD, where this packaging will simply be stripped out?
I think, David, I can partially answer that one. That there has been one at the beginning of this year, which was granted consent, but I think it's just the way the market has gone, and it's true that wet AD has been very rapidly encouraged. So, which is good in many ways, but it has been perhaps at the expense of commingled food and green. So I think the jury is out at the moment. Some local authorities are kicking off new collections of food and green, and it'll be just about getting that demand balance. So it's a good question, difficult to answer.
Emily, did you want to add to that? Hello, Emily.
Hi. Sorry, I was just turning the sound and the video back on.
Okay.
And the government certainly is spending money in total on new financial incentives for the AD sector. If we compare typical in-vessel composting gate fees with typical AD facility gate fees, there has been a lot of change, and there is some very significant regional and local variation. But there are areas where in-vessel composting gate fees are lower than AD gate fees. So for some local authorities, if they were to consider their whole system costs for collecting and disposing of all the waste they're responsible for, there is opportunity to make savings in terms of collecting more food waste and potentially including compostables within that. And where there is local capacity in in-vessel composting, in some areas we have that, then potentially more food and compostable packaging could be going into those in-vessel systems. And I think in some areas we're also seeing linkages between digestion and composting facilities, and where, for example, separated digestate perhaps need a bit further processing, the solid fraction. A few operators are sending the solids to composting facilities for further treatment. So there is options for compostable materials packaging to be further recovered in linked composting facilities on a local basis. Yeah.
Thank you. I do realise I may have confused one or two listeners. Yes, I did say that compostables are generally stripped out of wet AD plants, as are all packaging materials. Whereas, as Charlie pointed out earlier, dry AD plants, which are the norm across Europe, and post-AD composting, which is the norm across Europe, treat their compostable packaging in the composting process after the anaerobic digester. What happens in the UK is where wet anaerobic digesters, as Emily said in her presentation, want the very wet food waste, they will take out all the packaging, regardless of what it is, because that will disturb the anaerobic digestion process. Lucy and Charlie, any last comments before we close the webinar?
Don't think so, not from me.
And Lucy?
I'd just add that really working together with the waste sector is absolutely the key to this. I completely agree with Andy's comments at the beginning that it's not us and them, that the whole of our sector, so that's everybody involved in waste, in food service, in packaging, everybody needs to work together with their around a particular site, understand the directions everything's going, upstream, downstream, and that's the only way that all this can work. Similarly, I think where there's a huge opportunity coming up with the waste and resources strategy coming out soon, I think now's the time that really the UK needs a streamlined, universal recycling system. We need some major change. David, you've worked a lot in Italy, and you understand that they went through that change many years ago, and it's been extremely positive for the recycling sector there. So I think the next 6 months is the time that we are going to see a major shift in the way we treat our waste, to move away from a sort of bizarre situation at the moment where a lot of our confused, messy waste gets exported to be sorted, maybe, or incinerated or put in landfill somewhere else. So I think really it's time for us to make a major change to our waste systems and to take responsibility for the materials that we put on the market, and also where they can go here in the UK for local recycling.
Yes, I'm always hesitant to talk about the Italian situation, Lucy, because one wants to talk about the positive things that are happening here in the UK. But as you say, it took 10 years to sort out the situation in Italy, and now compostable materials are mainstream. All your food waste is collected in compostable bags. All the carrier bags are compostable, just like the Co-op has rolled out here in the UK. A lot of compostable packaging is used. A lot of schools are obliged by their regional councils to use compostable tableware, and all this goes very happily into anaerobic digestion and composting, because the packaging materials are composted even if they are stripped out by the anaerobic digester, and the system works, as you said, very, very well. We will get to it, and we're on our way to it here in the UK, and I think that there's so much positive stuff happening here that it will be quicker than we think it's going to be. Andy, I leave now to you, please, to wrap up. We've been going for an hour, and let me just thank all the participants for listening in, and over to you for the conclusions.
Yes, thank you, David, and I'd like to echo my word of thanks to everybody who's listened in and watched the presentations today. Just looking at a number of the questions as well, I think the most important thing to make clear to people is we know that there are elements of the supply chain and logistics that we need to sort out, but we're very much on board with that as an industry and reaching out to all the key stakeholders, and certainly with a vision that says this is us in the compostables industry working side by side with the other key associations and stakeholders with the same interests in mind to solve the packaging waste problem. It's a problem that's based on the fact that we have so many different materials out there because they serve different applications. So it's not us versus them, it's us and them all together working to get these issues sorted. And from those of you who are participants on this call at different parts of the supply chain, do keep listening into what we're doing, but also come and talk to us about it so that we make sure that we get the systems right for everybody. So that's it from me. Thank you very much, everybody, and good evening.